So today I'm going to talk about DSA, the Dark Eye, das schwarze Auge, Germany's second oldest role-playing game. And before I do that, I would just like to show you my collection, and it's by no means complete, because unfortunately this is all DSA 4, so 4th edition. And the problem is that most of the stuff is no longer available. You can see that I've got books, which I all bought this year, but lots of it are printouts because I have the PDFs and I'm just slowly printing them off. DSA 5 is right over here. There's a lot less, and I don't have everything, although everything is currently being shipped. By everything I mean I don't have every single adventure because I just don't need them. But I do have all the rule books. Some of them, as I said, are being shipped. I've got several of the regional or the region companions. Das Dornenreich is the most recent one. Havena, in my opinion, one of the best ones. I didn't really like, is it the Siebenwindküste? Anyway, die Siebenwindküste, I didn't really like that one. I thought it was really badly written. But this is just a tiny fraction of my collection because, like I said, most of it today is PDF because the old stuff is unfortunately no longer printed. But, you know, I've been printing them off myself. So that's just as an intro to the video. So I have now been collecting quite a lot of material for DSA. And a lot of the stuff that I have is actually DSA for 4th edition, simply because some of the stuff that came out for 5th edition was of no interest to me. I played the Donnerwacht Zeichen der Macht campaign. It's a 2-part campaign, and I think it's actually terribly badly written. But for some reason it also didn't really gel with me. There was no, I mean, although there may be some depth to it, and maybe the Theatre Knights campaign is going to be a lot more depth, but you know, I have kind of discovered my heart for 4th edition simply because you have all of the big and really, really good campaigns. And of course there are people who will be saying, well, the old stuff is all railroady, G7 is railroady, Filiason is railroady. Yes, they are railroady because DSA lives in a world that has a living history, and this history has been described for the last 37 years in computer games, in I don't know how many adventures, in how many adventure paths, in how many books, in how many stories, in how many novels. So it is probably the most well-developed fantasy world, probably bar Middle-earth. And we all know that Tolkien spent most of his life working on it. So I started putting together or trying to find a group that I could play this with. And so I've been joining groups, I've been playing in various groups, I've been playing one-shots, I've been playing few shots, I've been playing campaigns, I'm in a couple of campaigns at the moment, but I also like GMing. However, it has taken me a long time actually to find out what kind of a player I am and what kind of a GM that makes me. So I'm an epic player, which is also why I find Pathfinder and D&D quite unsatisfactory, because whenever I play something in Pathfinder or D&D, I have a feeling that the world only comes to life there and then. And lots of people go, oh yeah, but you've got the Dragonlance and you've got the Forgotten Realms. And I'm like, yeah, but this all seems ephemeral to me. I'll give you an example. We played the Strahd 5th edition in D&D, and I put together, and I think I actually did this online as well, there's a video where I create a ranger. So I used the Unearthed Arcana because the ranger apparently is one of the most hated character classes, and they nerfed it and did all kinds of it with it to make it more viable or whatnot. So I didn't mind. So I basically created a ranger. And then I also had to find out a place where this ranger lived, where she came from. So I was told, you know, use Eberron. So I used Eberron and I downloaded some background information on Eberron. I read through it. And so I created all of this. I created a ranger from Eberron with a backstory. And then when we played, none of this mattered. It was all about what kind of spells does your ranger know? What is her AC? What is her to hit? You know, what is your attack value? That was all that mattered. And it wasn't because the DM was inexperienced, because he wasn't. It was just that it seemed completely, I mean, I can't even remember where everyone else was from. Because it didn't make any difference. It was really just fighting here, check something here, do a check there. You know, it was all only about the stats of the characters. So I could have played anyone from anywhere and it would have had the same result. I could have played a ranger from somewhere else, it wouldn't have mattered. Because it just didn't matter at all. And it's very different in DSA, where you have the world and you as a character need to inhabit this world, which can be quite restrictive because there may be things that you want to do that you simply can't do. So when I was running DSA in my tabletop group, there was this guy and he played a witch that was, a warlock rather, that had, and he had decided to go for some kind of unarmed combat. Now, I hadn't really, I didn't have the books that he had, but if I'd had the same books, I would have told him, well, you can't have that, because that is a fighting style which is only available to, which is available to a group of people in the Deep South. They are forest dwellers, they are essentially aborigines. You don't have this because you come from a completely different background. You are a completely different, you live in a completely different area. There is no way you could have picked this up. They wouldn't have taught you this. It's something that's unavailable. But basically, what I learned was that the difference between playing DSA and playing Pathfinder or D&D is that D&D and Pathfinder are simply books where you just go in, oh, I want to do this, I want to do that, and you just put stuff together. You mix it all together, you shake it up, and then shazam, you have your character. Whereas in DSA, it's completely different. The character is pretty much set in stone when it comes to your background, when it comes to your race anyway, when it comes to where you are from. And this mixing and matching and min-maxing and saying, okay, I want to do this, this, and this, actually shouldn't be allowed. If you're a DM, and if I'm a DM, I will not let you do this. So if you say I'm a mage and I want to get witch spells, the answer is no, because it actually says in the books that witches don't share their knowledge. Also, the way witches come by their magic is completely different than the way mages come by their magic, and they cannot actually learn it because it's completely different. But so in a way, DSA is a world that you inhabit, and when you create a character that lives in that world. So I'm now running 2 separate campaigns with different players, and I would like to tell you a little bit about how these campaigns came into being. So the first one I have already talked about. It's the Toria campaign, Port of Velvenia. It's Grüne Hölle 1, 2, and 3. And when I read them, because I basically wanted to start GMing, but I wanted to work in an area where there isn't that much extant material, because then I could get less things wrong, simply because I had not been playing DSA for a very long time. So I'd missed out on many, many things, and it would have been difficult for me to just read up on basically everything there is in order to be able to run this campaign for people who know a lot about DSA. Now, there are only 5 books that deal with Uturia. And I've got them all. And so the description is very, very narrow because there is not so much that has been written. So, you know, and there are areas where I can say, okay, I'm going to make the decision that it's going to be like this, and it's my decision. So I basically looked for a gaming group and I made a couple of decisions up front. So I went by what the book says, you know, where they should be from and where they cannot be from, because it doesn't make historical sense to have people from a certain area, because it wouldn't work. I also read the 3 books, and there were certain elements to the books and to the adventure which I didn't like. So I decided not to go with them, and I knew from the very beginning that I was going to change those. Because some of them are really weird. There is no other way. I don't understand why they wrote them this way. There is one area where you basically have a huge battle between two armies, and essentially it's just the DM rolling for both armies, and you kind of go, okay, that's going to be great for the players when they see me rolling dice for both camps. That's going to be so boring. And I would have to say that, you know, the whole adventure isn't really well written. I understand that there were problems with the whole thing, and that they had deadlines, and that, you know, they had given this whole topic to somebody else and then took it back, and it was all kind of like difficult from a publishing perspective. But I agree with anyone who says this should not have been published the way it was published. But I was able to make it my own and say, okay, I'm going to change this, without actually touching the history and storyline of the living world of Aventuria or Uturia, but just changing what happens in the adventure to a certain degree while keeping the scaffolding intact. And I don't know how long we've been playing this, but I probably want to say that we've had about 10 sessions or so. That's about 40 hours of play plus one-to-ones. And we've covered the first half of the first book. But people have been enjoying this. So we're about... we've covered this. We're now on page 36. This book has these are all people, so basically it has 77 pages of adventure, including pictures and stuff, so we've covered less than half. However, I made several changes to it, and I think they actually helped and took away some of the arbitrariness, but also some of the rushing that is inherent in this game, in this particular module. And now I'm also running Erben des Shrouds and Isis, which is also a trilogy with 3 books. So this is number 3. And here I did it differently. For Uturia, I actually invited players and I interviewed them and I put together a group. For this one, I did it differently. I approached players that I wanted to play with, and I asked them and invited them, would they want to play with me this particular campaign? And here's something else happened which I didn't anticipate, because I was going to do what it says in the book. You know, there are certain races that you shouldn't be using, there are certain areas that you should not, or people from certain provinces that you should not have in the game, and there's one that you should under no circumstances have in your game. The problem is, when I first invited one of my co-players, she actually, of course, she didn't know, and I just mentioned, you know, you can't have that one, and or you shouldn't have this particular race, but she kind of overlooked it. And she came up with this character concept, which hinges upon playing this particular race. And I was like, okay, so that's going to be difficult because it actually states you can't have this. But I thought, okay, she's really invested in her character. So how can I ensure that she can play the character in this campaign? And that's when I started to research more and look outside the campaign and look beyond anything that is to do with the campaign. And I started looking at other materials from DSA. And I found a plethora of stuff. And I suddenly realized that I will not play this campaign. We will make our own campaign, but I will center it completely around the heroes. in this area, so I've got, in this campaign, I've got the heroes centered around the campaign. So heroes that fit the campaign. In this instance, I have a campaign that is going to be centered around the heroes. So it's not going to be Erben des Schwarzen Eises, which is, but it's going to be Das Erbe des Schwarzen Eises. So it's going to be a completely different story. So now I'm basically going through these books, and I also have Schwingen aus Schnee, which is a separate small campaign, which is set in a similar area. I've also got parts from Borberat's Erben, which I found, and I'm very happy that I found this. Then I basically have other materials which I got, so the parts of the Filiasson saga that basically take place in the same geographical area, to just find inspiration, to stay true to the topic, to stay true to the living history, but to bring in stuff that will create the story for them, while at the same time creating the story with the players and their characters, because now the characters have already reshaped the story. Because Schwingen aus Schnee doesn't play any role in this at all. But I'm going to bring it in. It's going to make perfect sense. But I'm now also at the stage where I'm saying to my players, I have no idea where we will end up. I can't tell you where we are going with this. I know topics that I want to cover, places where we should go, places where there is a story to tell. But if you, for example, don't take that hook and don't go to a certain place, it's not going to happen. Whereas here, I am still sticking to the big points that are outlined in the 3 books. Just how we get there depends on the way the players play. But I do know that we will have to cover them at some point, because there is a scaffolding that we're working along. But if you think of it like a ladder, the rungs are put in by the players, but the ladder is still there, and there's a top level of that ladder that we all will need to get to at some point. But how long it's taking us and how we're going to get there is up to the players. And so, for example, I threw out a couple of things which I wanted to cover, or which, I put out an NPC, and I had an idea of what I wanted to do with this NPC. But I wanted to make sure that people actually realized she was there and started to think about her and started to come up with, and start to interact with her. And I remember in a one-to-one with one of the players, this player says, "Oh, she must be an informant." And I'm like, "Oh, that's an idea. She's not an informant. She wasn't an informant when I was thinking of her. She was going to be a victim." And I wanted to, make her abduction matter in terms of, somebody's being abducted and it's somebody that they know, it's somebody that they have interacted with, rather than just a random person that they've never met. But when he said, "Oh, she must be an informant," I was like, okay, well, that's an interesting idea. So I didn't comment on it because it was just something that he said. But in my mind, I thought, okay, well, yeah, she's an informant. So what does that now mean? How do we deal with this? So she's an informant now. What do we do with this knowledge? And so that's how I kind of developed all of this, and how I said, okay, well, she's an informant, so I'm going to use her in that manner. And then there was another incident where one of the players wanted to use one of his character's abilities, and it allows him to see ghosts. Now, the problem is that at that stage, there were no ghosts in the game. There wasn't a single ghost. There was nothing there. But I really thought that this was such an excellent idea of trying to get to the bottom of what was going on. So I thought, okay, well, to see ghosts, maybe not, but to see the other world. Okay, so I came up with something that's not in the book that I hadn't planned, but I created a device, a story device, so that he could actually use his ability. And then I had created this story device, and it was now literally sitting there. And I took it from there. So I added more to it. I fleshed it out, and it became more and more important. And then I thought to myself, okay, so how can you actually utilize this more? So, so that it became more and more meaningful. So while at the same time staying true to the living history, while at the same time doing something that does make sense. And so I think that in a way, I'm now running these two campaigns very, very differently in many ways, in that this one has been shaped by the campaign itself, and the players make suggestions, or their characters make suggestions as to how this should run, and we follow those suggestions. Whereas in this case, the campaign itself doesn't exist anymore. It is now a story that we are telling and coming up with together, based on their characters, based on what their characters can do. And this is probably one of the last points that I would like to make, and that is a big question which has come up a couple of times this year in playing, where people ended up, and I ended up in a TPK, where the group had a certain makeup, and the DM didn't take that makeup into account at all, and it ended up in a TPK, which didn't really bother me because my character wasn't one that I was terribly invested in, but somebody else really was really frustrated because they had created this character just for that particular, it was a new character, and they put in so much thought and such a big backstory, and the character was simply sacrificed in 6 hours, and there was no rhyme or reason to it. It didn't matter at all. It was just okay. And that kind of like gave rise to the question, can you play every adventure with any group of people? Or do you really need to make sure that for each of the adventures you have just a dedicated group of people, and you basically have all kinds of groups present, or kinds of group members present, like you have your fighter, you have your mage, you have your cleric, whatnot, like you do it in D&D. And I think that DSA demands a lot more of the DM, in terms of, I truly believe that you can play any adventure with any group. What you have to do is, number one, if you see that your group has no fighters, you have to provide fighters as NPCs, if there is going to be combat. Otherwise, your group will die. But also, you have to be extremely flexible with regard to looking at what tasks does your group need to take part in or need to master, and what are your group's abilities and stats and spells if they have them, or liturgies if they have them, to make them matter. If I have a character that can prophesy, I want to be able to use this. Otherwise, why bother? Why have a character that can do this if you can't use it? So it is your job as the DM to take the adventure with all of its points that need to be hit, especially if it's a one-shot, you need to hit them, otherwise it's not going to work. It's not a campaign. You can't just come back later to a certain point just because you didn't hit it in the first instance. Then you have to take a look at the living history to ensure that you don't do something that goes completely against the core of the world. And in this case, this guy, completely neglected to understand the world and its implications. And then lastly, you have to take a look at your characters to see what they can do, and to ensure that the things they can do matter, and you bring them to the fore, and you ensure that you make sure that they can use their abilities. And at the same time, the areas where you simply don't have the abilities in your party, to bring in NPCs that do have them. And I'll give you an example. So, in this particular adventure, there is a city, and they have an annual race where they basically have the head of a statue, and it gets carried around the city, and different groups in the city, so different guilds, basically want to get that head, and then whoever puts it in the temple wins. So they will try to get it off of each other. And essentially it turns out that someone is trying to influence the race to get the head, to exchange the head for one that they made themselves, put it in the temple and do something evil with it. So far so good. So that's what you find out, and you are tasked with trying to prevent this from happening. Now, as it turns out, as you play the game, the evil person isn't just some kind of run-of-the-mill villain. It is actually a priest who is a priest to the 13th god. So you just have to accept that in DSA you have 12 gods, and then you've got the nameless one. He's the 13th god, and he is the nameless evil. He is evil incarnate. He is absolutely, unequivocally evil. And in our day and age, which is so secularized, this idea of having a religious backdrop where you have gods that interact with people. So it's pretty much like Greek myth, where the Greek gods would interact with mortals. This is what this world is like. And you have priests and priestesses who have been given powers from their relative gods that they can use to effect change in the world. So there's no question, does God exist? You know that the gods exist, and you see their miracles every day. And of course, these priests and priestesses belong to their gods and goddesses, and they are all against the 13th god. So I play a priestess in this particular setup, and someone else plays a priest as well, but of a different deity. And we are confronted with the fact that there is a priest of this nameless one doing mischief. There is no way we can just go, okay, well, you know what, we will just hunt for that head, and we will ignore the fact that somebody's trying to bring about Armageddon. Somebody is there who is worshipping this god. We just ignore it. It's not possible. It goes against everything that these priests stand for. So if you really role play, you cannot just go, okay, well, I don't care. We'll just, be over here and do something else. So the story unfolds. We find the head. We give it to the head priestess of the temple where it was supposed to be put. And we basically say, okay, and by the way, you've got one of those purple worshippers, because they wear purple robes, in there, and you need to do something. She's like, oh, well, no, we have the festivities of the head today, so we're not going to do anything. We're like, well, please send people, please send guards. There is something really evil happening. Well, they're all drunk because it's like the festival. And you kind of go, no, this is not how this would work. This is not what would happen. It's the equivalent of saying, okay, I've got an invasion of the United States from, let's say, I don't know, North Korea, and everybody goes, well, it's the 4th of July, we're not going to do anything. Let them come, we're all drunk. It wouldn't happen. There would be somebody there who would take responsibility and who would try to fight back. It's a completely nonsensical idea to say nobody's going to react. And to this day, I don't know why the DM ran it this way, because I read the adventure after the fact, and it doesn't say anywhere, oh yeah, well, they're not going to do anything. But he basically, so we all died because we tried to stave off the evil that was coming to town. And he was like, yeah, well, the idea was that you would all take part in the race and run the race with the other guilds and try to get the head. And you would have been hurt so badly during that race because it's quite physical and, people beat each other up to get the head, so that you would not have been able to actually pursue the others. And I'm like, sorry, that's totally ridiculous. As a priest of one of the good gods, if you see an evil priest, you will not give two hoots about some head that somebody else is trying to steal. You're going to go after them. And it was just this inability of the DM to actually understand and to foresee what the players and their characters would be doing that completely destroyed the game and led to a TPK. And I think this is again where you as the DM need to see the world first, then see the adventure within the world, and then see how your characters would inhabit first the world and then the adventure. And you can run any adventure with any adventuring group, but you have to be able to flexibly change the adventure. And I think this is more of an art form. And I think a lot of people who grew up on D&D don't have this ability, simply because D&D is quite often a mashup of things. Okay, so yeah, it's all stats based, it's all D100s. Oh, let's just do a table for encounters here, there, everywhere. Whenever I played Pathfinder, for example, and D&D is no different, the world itself only came alive within that adventure. And once the adventure was done, the world ceased to exist. It was like it was not there. Whereas in DSA, the world is always there. It continues to be lived in. It continues to develop, even when you're not playing. Which is also why it's important to know sometimes what year an adventure that you're playing is set in, because it means that you have knowledge of certain things that have happened before because they have already happened. But if you play in the past, they haven't happened. So you can't even refer back to them because they chronologically haven't happened. And one of the examples of where I feel that world building, for example, in Pathfinder simply doesn't exist was when I saw Starfinder for the first time, and where the world of Golarion simply doesn't exist. Now, if I'm invested in Pathfinder, if I'm invested in Golarion, which I'm not, and I want to look at Starfinder and I realize that my home world has ceased to exist and there's no mention of it. It's not even, something happened and, there's now the big mystery, what happened? It's just not there. You kind of go, okay, so it didn't really matter in the first place. It's just gone. And so I think this is where DMs that basically have this approach to DMing, that each adventure on its own is the world and there is no backdrop, will find it very difficult to run anything in DSA, because DSA doesn't work like this. Or they will run DSA and it will lead to disasters like that total party kill. The downside to DSA is if you want to play DSA as a DM, you need to do a lot of reading, you need to look at a lot of resources, you need to really go all out in order to be able to bring this world to life, especially when you're playing with people who have played DSA before. Because they will know loads of things and they will want to see the familiar. They will want to see the stuff that they've seen before. If they've been to Gareth, which is the main city, really, or one of the main cities, and it's the capital of the empire, and their character has been there before, then they want to know what has changed. But they also want to see the familiar people. They want to see, when they go to the Temple of Prios, they want to see the head of the temple that was there the last time, because chronologically speaking, they should still be there. So you need to know who is temple head at what stage. Thankfully, there's a wiki for this that you can go to and it will show you all of this information. But it's just that you have so much that you have to take into account. And I think for especially DMs who are not very flexible, because they don't have this knowledge or don't want to spend the time, DSA is probably going to be the wrong thing to look into. And this is also why my first foray back into DSA DMing after an absence of a very long time was Toria, because it's so, there isn't that much information. It's all in the books, which I have. I had all of the books and I'd read them all. So I knew everything that there was to know at that stage. Nothing has been published since, so there isn't any additional information that I should incorporate. But it actually helped me because I knew that anything there was to know was something that I had in my possession, that I had read, that I had basically absorbed as well. And questions that I had, I could answer using the wiki. And I think I would like to round this off with a shout out to Geek Gamers, who basically is, in my opinion, the queen of solo RPGing, who uses materials of all provenances, AD&D, Dungeon, D100 Dungeon, God knows what else she's got. I mean, you just have to check out her videos. And she approaches it in a different way, where I come from a world, then an adventure, and lastly, the characters that inhabit the world and then the adventure and try to run them through it. She does it differently. She creates her own world every single time, using dice rolling, using chance every single time to come up with something that is new every single time. Whereas when I DM in this particular world, I try to bring in the familiar and I try to uncover more stories that are already there, but that maybe the characters don't know or the players don't know. And best case scenario, neither of them knows. So I've got actually a best case scenario in that I've got a brand new player for DSA who's never played before and who is playing a character who comes from a very, very far-flung and remote area and comes into, if you like, into civilization. And she is discovering the world as her character is discovering the world, which is almost a win-win situation, because when she asks a question, it's her, but it's also her character who's surprised or puzzled or unsure or doesn't know. And so to me, this is also quite nice because I can think of, okay, what would she think of when she sees something? What would she think of the first time she sees a building made of wood? Because she comes from like the Arctic, beyond the Arctic Circle. There is no wood. You don't build in wood. And it is just this, it's just this this very, very interesting way of approaching this topic. And then you have the opposite, where you have somebody who recreates, or who creates, I should say, a world every single time she plays using chance almost consistently. Whereas here, it is not chance. It is really referring back to a story that has been told for the last 37 years and whose origins are even further back, because there is a story, a history of the whole world that dates back eons and eons and eons. And that's woven into the story and that you can use as well and kind of like fall back on. And so, yeah, that's what I've been doing this year with my GMing, and it's been quite an adventure. And that's all from me, probably for this year with regard to doing a talkie, as it were. There will be more stuff from me on air, but of course that will be in German. So for those of you who don't speak German, I wish you a happy Christmas and a happy New Year. And I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.